Hello, everyone, and welcome to JDI's Open House, an inside look at the movement to end sexual abuse behind bars. I'm Linda McFarland. I'm the Executive Director of Just Detention International, and my pronouns are she, her. Before we get started, I want to mention a couple of things. We have Spanish and ASL interpretation available today. You should see our ASL interpreter on screen. And we also have Spanish interpreter Laura. You'll see at the bottom of the screen a little globe. And if you click on that, you should see options for English or Spanish. The session is also being recorded. We'll have some opportunities for you to pose questions as well during the event. You can post questions in the Q&A box. And we also will have a chat box. We welcome you to say hello and let us know where you're tuning in from in the chat box. So today's event is the first in a series of 3 virtual sessions where we're going to look at the state of the movement to end sexual abuse behind bars. And we're holding today's open house with people like you in mind. And that's the people who support our work and who believe that no matter what crime someone may have committed, rape is never part of the penalty. So to kick us off, we're going to show a quick video of Jonas Caballero, a member of JDI's board of directors and of our Survivor Council, and one of the leaders in the movement to end sexual abuse in detention.
Hello, everyone, and a big welcome to JDI's Open House. My name is Jonas Caballero, and I am a proud member of the board and Survivor Council at Just Detention International. After experiencing multiple sexual assaults by jail and prison officials in New York, I struggled to find any help at all, despite reaching out far and wide to over 100 elected officials and journalists. It wasn't until I discovered JDI that I was finally able to get connected with a local trauma-informed counselor who was able to listen to me, to hear me, to see me, and to support me through those dark and trying times. What I endured was a direct catalyst in my decision to go to law school. And as I finish my final semester, I'm honored to continue fighting for the rights of incarcerated survivors, both as a board member and a Survivor Council member at JDI. And next year, after passing the bar, I will continue to keep working to ensure that no one suffers in silence. Rape and sexual assault, this should never be part of the penalty, and every single one of us should do everything in our power to fight for the rights of incarcerated survivors. Thanks.
Well, a huge thanks to Jonas for that really warm welcome. I know he was disappointed he couldn't be with us here today live. So I know that many of you, and I see you, have been involved in our work for many years, while some might be new to our organization. However long you've known about our work, today is an opportunity to learn more about it and to get more involved in the movement. I also want to give a special welcome and shout out to our donors and partners in this work. As I said, I see many of you here, and I'm really grateful that you joined us. So for those of you who are newer to JDI, I want to give just a quick introduction about who we are. JDI is a health and human rights organization that works to end sexual abuse in all forms of detention. Sexual abuse in detention is a nationwide crisis. More than 200,000 adults and children are sexually abused while in the government's custody every year. This number represents the number of people, not the number of incidents. Most survivors of sexual abuse are actually sexually abused over and over again. And about half of that abuse is committed by staff, the very people who are supposed to keep them safe. The human rights crisis of sexual abuse in detention is directly related to mass incarceration, which is a system based in white supremacy that sends millions of people every year to prisons and jails that are rife with deprivation, humiliation, cruelty. And this reflects also the broader inequities in our society at large. The people who are most affected by sexual abuse in detention are people of color, LGBTIQ+ people, people with disabilities, people who are deaf, people with mental illness, and survivors of trauma. So that's why our work and all of our work, we seek to address racism, sexism, anti-gay and anti-trans hatred, discrimination against people with disabilities, and other forms of bigotry behind bars. Sexual abuse in detention is widespread and it's deeply entrenched, but at JDI, we believe, in fact, we know that it's absolutely preventable. So for more than 4 decades, we've been the leader in this effort to stop sexual abuse behind bars. We work with policymakers, corrections officials, currently and formerly incarcerated people, most importantly, rape crisis centers, and other advocates to protect the human rights of people in detention, US and globally. We fight for laws and policies that address sexual abuse in detention, and we follow through on the ground, bringing hope and support to people who are locked up. So today you're going to be hearing from my colleagues about the impact of our programs, our direct service work, policy advocacy, and survivor-centered activism. We're really excited as well to highlight the work of our sister organization, Just Detention International South Africa. So now I'm going to stop and pass it over to JDI's Deputy Executive Director, Cynthia Totten, to start off this exciting conversation. Hi, Cynthia.
Hi, Linda. Thank you so much for that introduction. And of course, I just want to say how lovely it was to have that video message from Jonas Caballero. He and I had the honor of co-presenting the opening plenary at this year's National Sexual Assault Conference, and he is just an incredible warrior in this work. So that was terrific. So today we're going to take an inside look into some of the programs and services that JDI provides to survivors. And to kick us off, I'm going to invite onto the screen Edward Cervantes, a senior program officer at JDI, to talk about the exciting work he does leading art and mindfulness workshops inside California prisons. Welcome, Edward. So great to see you.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm so happy to be here.
So Edward, you do so much work on the ground for JDI, directly supporting people who are incarcerated and who have endured trauma, oftentimes throughout their lives, providing services like trauma-informed workshops for incarcerated survivors is a priority for JDI because most people in detention simply cannot get help from traditional outside counselors and service providers. I'd love to start by asking you to talk a little bit specifically about the art workshops that you run, and then we're going to show some of the photos from those art workshops while we talk, art that was created by incarcerated survivors. And then can you tell us a little bit about why we offer workshops in prisons and why programs like this are so important for incarcerated survivors?
Yeah, thanks, Cynthia. Yeah, I'd love to share about our work at CRC, the California Rehabilitation Center. It's a hot and dusty prison out in the suburbs of Los Angeles. It's the former Hotel California up on a hill, which is dilapidated and empty currently. And then there's also barracks where the incarcerated men live. So we find that there's not much programming there. There's some college classes. So people are bored often. And what little programming there is often focused on the harm that people might have committed. And we believe that people are much more than, the worst moment in their lives. So through our programming, the art workshops in particular, it's called Rooted in Resilience. It's a 14-session series of workshops. So in those workshops, we really focus on creating a safe space. We want people to come to these workshops and think of themselves as full people, right? So we cover topics like self-care. We invite people to think about the full range of their emotions. We do a workshop on resilience, where we ask people to think of moments where they've overcome obstacles, or to think of their life experiences in a way where they can get benefit from them. So even the difficult experiences, I think that we can look at them and find something positive. That's the spin that we put on it. So yeah, I think, and we do art because it's a gentle way for people to think about some of the traumas that they've experienced in their lives. So we don't ask people to open up and share that trauma. Rather, we invite people to think about it through art. So that it's a more gentle way. And we also focus on getting people to think of themselves with some kindness and compassion, rather than just as people who've committed harm in the past. So on the screen, should I talk about the art on the?
Oh, absolutely. Go for it. Yeah, I'm loving this piece that's up right now. That's like a total escape, right? From California Rehabilitation Center. So go for it.
Yeah, so if we can go back, actually, let's go to the first one. This one. So this is from our workshop called Monster Feelings. And while the word monster is in the title, we actually invite people to think of their feelings in sort of as like a cute monster. This one is a little less cute, but and we also ask people to think about joy, for example, as a monster. Like if joy were a monster, what would that look like? And I wasn't there for this particular art workshop, but you can see it's very expressive. And it's just a way for people to, again, think about the full range of their emotions in a way that's not so intimidating. And the next artwork, this is from our workshop called A Window of Time. So we invite people to think about a moment or a place, a space, a memory that feels safe for them. So we ask people to think about all of their senses. What did that moment feel like? Or what did that place feel like? What did it smell like? So we really invite people to think about the full range of their senses. So whether it's like this person, looks like a island or a sunset, very peaceful. How did the sun feel against your skin? How did the cool breeze feel, or the warm breeze? Was it the sand underneath your toes? And in that way, again, so in getting people to think about all of the senses and then to make art about that moment or that place or that memory, we hope that it creates, or that people are then able to access that space or that place in their minds in moments that are difficult. So if there's something that they're going through that's difficult, we present this idea of the window of time as something that they can go back to, and like something that they can access even while they're incarcerated.
Wow, that's extremely powerful. Thank you.
And then we can talk about the next one.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go for it.
This
Sorry, I
one,
didn't mean to cut you off.
no, it's okay. So this one, and I'll try to, I can go on forever. This one is about, this workshop is called Inside Outside. So we invite people to create art about how they might be perceived by people on the outside. So inviting people to think, okay, as someone who's incarcerated, what are the things that people assume about you? The bad stuff. And so on the out, and if we could go to the next slide. Oh no, it is this one. So this person on the outside, the other side, sorry. This one, yes. So on the outside, you don't see me, you don't read me, they feel torn, broken, uneducated. These are the things that people assume about them, just looking at them from the outside. And so that's the outside of the art piece. And then on the inside, this particular person made an angel, where it says, I have a message, I have a heart, do you see me now? And it's the things that they value about themselves on the inside, who they truly are. And this particular participant completed the 14 week art workshops and is now in our mindfulness workshops, which I'll talk about in a second. But I had the opportunity to speak to them during our mindfulness class. And he said that class was the only time I've been taken out of prison in here. When I stepped into that space, it's like I wasn't locked up. The world had gone to black and white, and Chris and Yamila helped me, I believe he says, see life in color again, or something like that. And that's what we really want. And that's, I think, the power of these art workshops, is that he said that because of the trauma he'd experienced as a child, that he lost interest in art, the world had kind of gone to black and white, there was just a darkness. And just by coming to the art workshops and like having to think about these things in a different way, he said that color was brought back to his life, which was really just beautiful. And like, I was just like, okay, let's just like snip all of that. And that's, I think, the perfect snippet of what the art or the power of our art workshops.
That's amazing. And I have to say, it feels like it doesn't matter whether it's our therapeutic art workshops in California, in New York, in South Dakota, in South Africa, again and again, we get that feedback, right? It's like I got to step outside of or be outside of that prison for that hour or hour and a half. And that's just an amazing gift to be able to give someone. So thank you, Edward, for sharing that. And yes, I want to ask you to talk about mindfulness. And that's an area where you and our team have done incredible things to grow a program where we're bringing mindfulness inside behind bars. And so it's yet another program that most incarcerated people would not have had access to outside of this opportunity that you're bringing them. So Edward, talk a little bit about what mindfulness is and explain a bit about what goes on when someone steps into a mindfulness class at one of the facilities that we work in.
Yeah. So mindfulness is about paying attention in a particular way on purpose and without judgment. So we do, so it's meditation based. We do a meditation and then we have a topic of discussion where again, we ask people to just pay attention to themselves, to their thoughts, to their feelings as full people. So not just as like that worst moment in their lives, but rather to think about the joys and like the good things about themselves and to be aware of that stuff. Prisons, and that prison in particular, can be really loud and chaotic. I mentioned that there's barracks on the grounds, and that's where most people live. So it's 100 men in a small old barracks. So they're really loud, and people have to deal with that chaos, with the constant sounds, with people who are in crisis. And so what we do in our mindfulness workshops is invite people to, because you can't drown sounds out, like they're not going to be able to drown it out. There are people who, one participant shared with me that he would turn up his TV all the way, because they do have a little TV that they can keep on their bunk. So he would turn the TV all the way up and he would put his head near the TV to try to drown out all of the sounds. And that just gave me like it just, I hadn't realized quite what that might feel like. I hadn't realized what that would feel like. And so that has really stuck with me. And so thinking about that, this week actually, we did a sound meditation where we asked people to like open up the sense of sound, to take in all of the sounds, and rather than trying to ignore them or ignore that they might feel triggered by them or that they might feel frustrated by them, to try to work with the sounds in a different way, with the hopes that perhaps it could become like a white noise. Can you soften your focus and the sense of sound so that they're not as triggering and jarring to them, in their daily life. So that's one example of what we do. And the impact is that I think people really enjoy coming to our space. Again, we focus on creating a safe space, a quiet space. They really enjoy the silence. And so we really try to, when we get that silence, because it is rare even while we're in group. So when we find those moments, we try to like stretch them out so that they have some peace. And we hear all the time just how powerful it is to experience that quiet, even if it is just for short periods of time.
Wow, that sounds incredible, Edward. And yeah, I think we could talk on and on about this. That's so powerful. But I
Can
do
I
want
mention one last quick thing?
sure.
So that now I think it's really important to say that like if somebody completes those two programs now, they get enough credits to get 10 days off of their sentence. And I think that's really important to people. 10 days might not seem like a lot, but it means a lot to our participants. And so that for them to be able to finish JDI's programming and have that as a reward, I think is really important.
Yeah, thank you, Edward. So now let's bring in our wonderful colleague, Johanna Mills. She is a JDI program associate and a member of our Survivor Council. Welcome, Johanna. And I imagine you've got Samson there with you not too far away. So welcome to you both.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Yes, he's right here on my lap. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, Samson is Johanna's emotional support pet dog, if I can, there he is. So speaking, so something I did want to ask you both about actually is that something that both of you are both involved in that is really important. It's just a huge undertaking and a huge part of JDI's work is that we receive thousands of letters every year from survivors of sexual abuse. And we respond to every single person who writes to us. So I wanted to ask, Edward, can you talk to us just a little bit about that process? And then I've got a question for you, Johanna.
Yeah, so writing is still the primary way for people to get in touch with the outside world. So we get thousands of letters every year. We respond to everybody. We provide resources. And I think most importantly, it's like a warm handoff. We try to make sure that the resources that we provide to people are going to actually be responsive, because so many of the organizations that people reach out to don't have the time, capacity, or knowledge to respond to people who are incarcerated. So we really focus on providing information and resources that are going to be helpful and useful to people.
That's great. Yeah. And then Johanna, speaking of letters, you wrote your first letter to JDI, and we were called Stop Prisoner Rape back then, in 1997 while you were incarcerated. And actually, Edward, there's like a whole history here because Edward, you went and visited Johanna, while you were in prison. Can you tell us a little bit, Johanna, about what it was like to reach out to JDI and what it was like to get that support from people like Edward?
Oh, it was awesome. Edward actually came and seen me. I believe that's the first time that I can actually say that I felt what safety felt like. He just brought with him such a comfort, and I knew that from that point forward, it was like throwing a safety net over me and over folks like me, and that things were going to be taken care of from that point on. And I learned a lot and became involved. So it was really awesome.
Wow, that's fantastic to hear. And, the thing that I think, I'm inspired by you all the time, Johanna, but I think what is so inspiring about you is that you've seen the impact of our work from both sides, right? Both as someone who got help from JDI while you were incarcerated, and when you were that, brave survivor reaching out for help and advocating for yourself. And then as someone who today helps incarcerated people as a member of JDI staff And you and I and Edward and Linda, we all get to work, shoulder to shoulder doing this work. So I want to bring up one of the ways that you're helping folks, though, one of the really specific things that we haven't touched on yet, and that is through an Inside Line, which is our hotline for incarcerated survivors in 2 state prisons. It's the two state prison systems, excuse me. And it's the first ever dedicated rape crisis hotline for incarcerated people. Through this hotline, we receive about 500 calls a year. Can you tell us a little bit about what the hotline is and why it's so important, Johanna?
The hotline is like a lifeline for people who are incarcerated, survivors of sexual abuse. It's incredible. Some of the reasons why people would call in would be support, and there's comfort in knowing that someone on the outside knows what they're going through and cares about them, their well-being, and believes them. Even if it takes them out of their situation for only the time being that they're on the phone and able to make that call, it's to have that support inside of an institution is just, it's something that you just can't get inside of that institution, and it's amazing. I always make sure that when I speak to somebody on the phone that I let them know that they're very strong for having the courage to get on that phone and make that call, because that's not an easy situation. There's always people around them. There's always other incarcerated people around them. And if they're in segregation, there's staff around them. And that's a very fearful thing to go through, because you don't know what's going to happen to you after you hang up that call.
Wow. Thank you, Johanna. And thank you both, Johanna and Edward, for joining us today. And thank you both for all the incredible work that you're doing every day to advocate for the safety and dignity of incarcerated people. So we're going to move on a little bit now and turn our attention to a different part of JDI's work, our policy advocacy. And Julia Bate, who is JDI's National Advocacy Director, is joining us. Hey, Julie.
Hey,
She leads JDI's federal and state policy work, advocating for government action to address sexual abuse behind bars. So Julie, you are based, when you're not in the Brady Bunch living room, you are based in Washington, D.C., like me. It's where we have an office and a longstanding presence doing federal policy work. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got into this work?
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to. I got interested in working with folks who were locked up when I was in college. I had a fantastic professor, and with her, we started a children's visitation program at the local county jail, Washtenaw County Jail up in Michigan. And I decided to go to law school based on my experience with the people in custody. And so I came to DC to go to law school, and I just have never left and never regretted it for a second. My first job right out of law school was in a big bad law firm, and my second day on the job, we filed a class action of sexual abuse of women prisoners by the DC Department of Corrections. So clearly the team had been working some time before I got there. But that was just my first entree into litigation and what litigation can and can't do. Coincidentally, Brenda Smith, who was one of the original PREA commissioners and currently a professor and probably some sort of dean at American University Washington College of Law, was co-counsel on that women prisoners case. After that, I went to the Department of Justice and worked on pattern and practice cases of constitutional violations with, obviously, for me, a focus on sexual abuse of women who are in custody. And so that kind of truncated the process a bit. We didn't have to file a lawsuit. We just up and go in, and then we do our investigation, make findings, and then the real work would begin. It's not a problem. It's not difficult to find a problem. Go into a facility in crisis, you're going to find it. You're going to find folks who will want to talk and share their experiences. The real creativity and the real challenge is in crafting a solution specific to that facility, with that population, with that makeup of staff folk that they have there. Also, when I was at DOJ, was able to be on the Attorney General's PREA working group, and we're the ones that drafted the PREA standards based on comments from many of you on this Zoom, and certainly with an outsized emphasis on what JDI was putting up the pipeline at any given time. We would look at that. So even those cases, though, even though we didn't have to go through all that, the court stuff and the battling with other lawyers that doesn't do anything good, right? When you go into the institutions, you start to see weaknesses. You start to see if they don't have a problem now, they easily could, if only they would strengthen whatever it is that you're noticing the problem to be. And so that's what attracted me to JDI. First of all, they are, like, you've heard these people, you've heard my colleagues, they are kind, they are wonderful, they directly benefit people behind bars. They have superpowers that I could not even dream of possessing. They're phenomenal. And they also work with correctional agencies and facilities to identify weaknesses, to help them address certain areas of perhaps pre-implementation, conduct trainings, train peer educators to empower people who are locked up to talk to other folks who are locked up. And so that's what brought me to JDI, and I'm thrilled to be at JDI.
Yeah, and we are thrilled to have you. So talk a little bit about how your work at JDI helps to address some of the common sort of failures that we see at the systemic level that contribute to sexual abuse in detention.
Yeah, so one of the things that I enjoy doing is speaking with other attorneys who are litigating these cases. Most lawyers stick in one jurisdiction or one state throughout the course of their careers, and for the most part, people who experience sexual abuse in custody do not ever make it to any court whatsoever. They just don't. Therefore, most attorneys have no experience in litigating these cases and don't know about the systemic issues and how they kind of interplay and link off each other, where the documents are, what you would expect to see. What does a passing PREA audit mean, after all, right? And so I like to conduct trainings for folks who are litigating these cases, who may be having cases for the first time, or just last week, Johanna and board member Kathy Dennehy and I did a training for the Alaska Bar Association for 2 hours. They're recruiting pro bono attorneys who they're hoping are going to take up these types of cases, and want a little primer on what does this mean? What is the situation that we're talking about? So it was a really beneficial training, I think, for the folks that attended that one.
Wow. Yeah, that's so cool. And this is actually a really opportune moment to talk to you because 1 week ago you spoke on Capitol Hill testifying about the crisis of sexual abuse behind bars, and you were on fire, can I just say? So, can you tell us what is being done at the legislative and policy level to address this crisis and support survivors?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Cynthia. Thanks for all of your help in preparing me. That was really a fun thing to do. Preparation, not so much, but talking to those folks was amazing. So one of the most important things I think that's going on right now is the Sexual Abuse Services and Detention Act, SACETA. It had been introduced in the Senate a while back, and it was introduced in the House just last Wednesday as well. And that's a bill designed to provide these hotline services that Johanna was telling us about to everybody everywhere. Every jail, every prison in the country who needs to reach out because people don't have their voices. They're taken away. They don't have supports when they're on the inside. They don't have access to the outside. And even when they do have access to the outside, oftentimes they're not believed, they're not heard, they're not paid attention to. And so, as Johanna said, this is the place where these folks go to feel safe. As she explained, when Edward came to visit her in prison, which, by the way, I had not known that. That's super cool. That's when she felt safe. So providing that safety, providing that empathy, providing that listening ear to folks in custody, it sounds so simple, but it is. I can't even say how impactful that those simple acts are. So SACETA would allow grants to local community service providers in order to provide services to folks who are in custody, who they may not think of as their constituents. And it also provides a link for folks when they get out of custody, then they know those resources are still available for me when I go back into the community, and they'll have that support throughout their transition back to society as well. The other thing is looking at what tweaks need to be made to PREA. And I don't personally think there are any tweaks that need to be made to PREA. What they need is to provide adequate support and funding to folks on the ground who are doing the work, because PREA is not self-executing. You have to take these 45 plus standards with 300 plus subparts and implement them, not just once, but every single day going forward. And that takes a lot of focus. With the staffing crisis, especially, sometimes attention to PREA and implementation of the standards can kind of fall by the wayside with disastrous consequences. So we need to just understand that culture change takes time. These facilities and these systems did not become what they were overnight, and they won't be fixed overnight. But with the proper supports and the proper attention to the right things, that's what we're looking for, and needing the support through what the people need on the ground. Survivors need support, staff need training, resources, time to focus on the issue as well. So those are the two main things that I think we're talking about there.
Fantastic. And I've got one last question for you. As we all know, we have a little thing coming up called the presidential election of 2024. How do you think, Julie, how is the outcome of the election going to affect our work at JDI?
So it's definitely not going to affect the work at JDI because JDI has always been nonpartisan, which is another thing that really drew me to this organization. It was shocking to me when I worked at DOJ to find that the Democratic administrations were not as interested in conditions of confinement in prisons. And the Trump administration opened more CRIPA cases than did the Obama administration in half as many years, right? Different focuses, all sorts of different things. There were different statutes and they were all great. Just what are you going to focus on? So there's absolutely no party or political affiliation to our work, our survivors, or the folks that are running these correctional institutions and working in these institutions, or to us. And that's one thing that I get kind of afraid of politicizing the issue or allowing others to politicize it, because that sets the stage for, in these polarized times, whatever the next party gets into power, whatever it is, they'll undo whatever happened during the other party because it's seen as polarizing, and it just isn't. And so PREA, again, to this day, it continues to enjoy widespread bipartisan support from everybody we talk to on the Hill and in the country. So I'm really appreciative for that. So it will not affect our work at all.
That is awesome. I love the way you put that. Thank you, Julie, for your tireless advocacy. Thank you for being part of the program today. And now we're going to shift a little bit. We're going to take a little journey to South Africa, one of my favorite places in the world. While JDI's work is focused in the United States, we also work closely with our sister organization called JDI South Africa. It is such a privilege to do this work alongside our colleagues there, and we are beyond thrilled that JDISA's co-director, Prince Nare, is here with us to talk about that work. Welcome, Prince.
Thank you, Cynthia, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone, depending on where you are.
Yeah, and I'm sorry because I know it's a little late there, and I don't know if we've pulled you away from dinner or what, but thank you for being here. So to start off, can you tell us a little bit about what incarceration looks like in South Africa? What does the prison population look like, and what facilities are there?
Yes, thank you. Firstly, I want to say, South Africa relies very heavily on incarceration and has one of the largest, it's actually the largest prison population in Africa, which is about 160,000 people in the country's prisons, many of them in there for minor offenses, non-violent offenses. Out of these, about 5,000, which is 3%, are women or people incarcerated in women's facilities. Over a third, which is close to 55,000, are awaiting trial, and many of them will await trial for years and years in there. Males, men and boys, make up the vast majority of incarcerated people, with Black and brown men being the most represented, nearly 97%, quite disproportionately represented. Most of the country's prisons struggle with overcrowding. Currently, it's at 143% overcrowding. In other words, the facilities hold nearly 50,000 more people than they have capacity for. In some instances, people have to share a bed, some have to sleep on the floor, and the vast majority of these people come from poor, marginalized communities sort of emerging from the enduring effects of apartheid and years of colonialism. In prison, many of these people experience further dehumanization and deprivation. You know, facilities are dilapidated, they are violent and characterized by ill health with inadequate health support. There's also a practice called lockup, where, you know, around midday, incarcerated people receive their lunch and dinner and then be locked out into their cells from like midday to the next morning, around 7 a.m. the next morning. So you can sort of, picture that. The conditions are horrible, and that's the sort of situation in South Africa.
Yeah, thank you, Prince, for that overview. And, you know, as part of this work, just as we do here in the US, you all have really centered the voices of survivors in your work. And last year, JDI South Africa, you started your Survivor Council. So we're going to put up some photos of the Survivor Council members on the screen. And it's wonderful to see these photos. Can you talk a little bit about the Survivor Council members? Who are they, and how is their advocacy furthering the work in South Africa?
So firstly, I want to say we are very grateful to be working with the Survivor Council. You know, they add so much to our work. Isaac, I'm going to start about, he's not on the picture. So what we have here on the picture is Teboho and Vusi. They were participating here at an art workshop. I think I want to add more about art workshops. Edward has spoken a lot about that. But we've worked with Isaac, for example, for many years. And he's one of the first people to openly speak about experiencing sexual abuse in detention. Sort of paving the way for many others to follow suit. And people like Teboho, who's shown on my picture here, is on the left, and in the middle there is Vusi. Many of the people on our Survivor Council are members of the LGBTI community. Isaac himself, as I mentioned, is a mixed race person from the Western Cape. He has a disability and is a gay man. And what we see is that many people who are targeted in prison, and it's not by coincidence that many of those are on the Survivor Council, are members of the LGBTI community. On the picture there, we have Odwa. Odwa is a trans woman and a sex worker who's working with us to contribute to the advocacy for the decriminalization of sex work. People like her experience a lot of violence at the hands of the police, including sexual violence, and she has played a critical role in making contributions to Parliament, to oversight bodies on how to keep people like herself and mainly to criminalize sex work in South Africa, which she believes will make a huge difference in mainly trans people's lives. And this was also at a workshop. This picture was taken at a workshop where we were conducting a trauma-informed art workshop with members of the trans community mainly. This picture is JDI staff members and Survivor Council members and other formerly incarcerated people whom we work with. Talking more about the Survivor Council, we also have someone called Teboho and Tsakani. These were arrested when they were very young. Teboho was 12 and Tsakani was only 13. They were children and they were locked up, and within days, they both experienced sexual violence. And in our work, they speak a lot about, how to keep children specifically out of prison, promoting restorative justice. And they've done an incredible job contributing to sort of policy reviews, panel discussions on restorative justice, and alternatives to detention. So we're very grateful to the to the voices of the Survivor Council. Whenever they speak or share their stories, you see a shift in public attitudes about not just sexual abuse in detention, but about incarceration and the rights of incarcerated people more broadly. So yes, yeah.
Yeah. And in fact, this year, JDISA celebrated its 10th anniversary. And I got to be there and spend a little time with you and Odwa and Vusi and Taboho and some of the other Survivor Council members and our staff. And it was just incredible to see how far you all have brought the work and to see the very fierce advocacy that the Survivor Council members are engaged in alongside the staff. So that was incredible. So from that vein, how would you say the work has changed in the past decade, and where is it going? What are you looking forward to when we do our 20th anniversary celebration of JDISA?
Yeah, thank you. That's a really good question. I think, when this work was started many, many years ago by my colleagues, and you, Cynthia, was involved, and others from JDI actually came to South Africa in the early 2000s to work with corrections officials and oversight bodies to sort of explore ways of addressing the problem. At the time, many Department of Correctional Services officials would not even acknowledge that sexual abuse happens in detention. And over years, those that did just felt like, it was just part of prison life, that there wasn't much that they could do about the problem. And so over years, we have really managed to change that. We have worked with partners to put in place, sort of to hold government accountable, specifically by putting in place, a policy aimed at making sure that this problem is addressed, that survivors are supported. We've trained hundreds of correctional officials, sort of building their capacity and motivation, to addressing the problem. Part of the issue has been that there's a sense of helplessness that officials experience. And our work has sort of centered around building their capacity, their sense of understanding that this is a problem that can be fixed. We can end sexual abuse and we can support survivors. And currently we are working with the National Department of Correctional Services to really build their commitment and institutionalize the work to address sexual abuse in detention. Over the years, we have also increased. I know when you came to South Africa, part of the people you spoke to were the Judicial Inspectorate for Correctional Services. And what we have done over the years is to pick up on that work and really sort of, increase our work with this called JICs, building their capacity to see sexual abuse as part of their constituency. They visit facilities and often they don't focus on sexual abuse. So to make sure that they see this as an issue they need to address, providing them with the tools, assessment tools, or to measure sort of implementation of policies aimed at keeping people safe. A few years ago, we introduced art workshops. Inside, we went to a couple of correctional facilities. The largest one here in Johannesburg, it's called Johannesburg Correctional. In the Western Cape, in Cape Town, we've been to Pollsmoor, and in the small rural towns like Thohoyandou, we've gone inside conducting art workshops, sort of providing a space. I think Edward spoke about this, about the impact of art, but really providing a space for people to really breathe, to feel, to feel seen, to express themselves. And many have also gone beyond that and use art as their form of advocacy, sharing about horrible conditions inside through art and showing how people can be kept safe, really sharing their visions for change. So that has been super, super exciting for us to do that. We are in the coming months and years, we'll be working with our partners in the Detention Justice Forum, which is a sort of a civil society coalition we helped found, focused on promoting the rights of incarcerated people. We want to make sure that South Africa changes its path, right? You know, I said earlier, we are one of the highest incarcerators in Africa. To make sure that, you know, we have less people in detention, that detention is used as a really last resort. Yeah, and that, you know, we change laws and policies that are really anti-poor and anti-Black, that land many people in prison and, you know, putting them directly in harm's way. So that's really I'm looking forward to, and that's the exciting work we're doing.
Well, that sounds amazing. And I can't wait to see all that you and our South Africa team are going to continue to do. Thank you, Prince. So I am now going to invite the whole crew back. We're going to move into our Q&A, and I'll invite our colleague, Susana Contreras, if she's got any questions that have been coming in, what's been going on in the chat, Susana, that you have for us.
Sure, thanks, Cynthia. So we do have some really good questions in the chat. And the first one is for Julie. There has been a lot of controversy lately about housing transgender people, particularly when we talk about women's prisons. Can you talk about where JDI stands on this and how we can be sure that transgender people are housed in appropriate facilities?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that really are talking about transgender women going to facilities that are designated for women. We never hear about transgender men, and we need to start hearing about trans men. At any rate, so housing placements based on gender identity have been going on in the field for literally 4 decades. Almost every women's prison that I've been in the heart of the country and on the coasts as well, have housed transgender women successfully in prisons designated for women. This is the time when the issue becomes politicized, that like all hell breaks loose, right? And there is a real concern, absolutely, with men who are not transgender, who do not identify as transgender, claiming that they are in order to be placed in a different prison. That should never happen. That is not safe for anybody. So putting that aside, there are bad actors who do bad things, and that's not who we want to be housed in a bad way, right? Meaning with women prisoners. It's just not okay. Any correctional facility or agency should be able to easily identify people who are gaming the system, and they should never let it happen. Right. So once these housing placements are made, where a transgender woman is transferred from a male institution into a facility designated for women, that's when, again, the work begins, right? Because you have to make sure that there are supports for everybody involved. You have to make sure that staff don't vilify the new person who's coming into the unit, and make sure that everyone's needs are addressed. If there is a transgender woman who is being moved into a prison for women, who does have some sort of problematic criminal background, right? That would make them perhaps threatening or dangerous to other folks in custody. That's exactly what one of the PREA standards is designed to address: intake screening and using that screening throughout a person's incarceration. So just as if you had a cisgender woman who had a history of horrible things that they did to other people, you would not house that person with somebody who is there on a petty offense or check writing or something that's completely nonviolent. Same thing as well. So you have to make sure that you're doing the proper classifications and housing placement within the facility once that transfer is made. It might be a little bit easier when folks identify as transgender in the community and then come into the system. That seems like it's pretty much a no-brainer that they should be housed according to their gender identity. But so many folks have been in custody for so many years, for the majority of their lives. And that's where they come to realize who they are, what they need, and what they need to do to address how they're feeling. And that's where the complications come up. And again, when facilities and agencies make a concerted effort to draw in folks from different backgrounds, from different positions, medical, mental health, security at the facility for men, security at the facility for women, programming on both ends, that's when you can make a proper, safe, successful transfer. And also you avoid that risk, that heightened risk that transgender women face when they're housed in facilities designated for men of sexual abuse, which is ridiculously awful and happens all the time and it's horrific. So that gets rid of that one of those problems. Anyway, hope that wasn't too much of a long-winded answer, but a really great question. Thank you so much for asking it, because there's a really common sense answer, and it's not a political answer at all, and it should never be.
Thank you, Julie. Yeah, it's totally nuanced, right? It's hard to kind of parse that out. So another question that came up as we talked about this is that people convicted of sex offenses are often threatened with sexual violence in prison. Do you find that people in that category are frequently victims of sexual violence while incarcerated? Again, that's for you, Julie.
Thank you for that one again. It's interesting because there are a list of risk factors that people have to pay attention to in facilities when they're determining whether there's a risk for aggression or a risk for potential victimization. And prior convictions of sex crimes is actually on a risk list for the risk of a potential aggression, right? And that is certainly true. And also, Jeannie, perfect. Like, absolutely, folks are targeted for those factors as well. That's I think more well understood, especially in the facilities for men. That yeah, you get stuck with a sex offender label and you're in big trouble. So that's been, I think, recognized for a long time, and folks do take that into consideration. When we're talking about men, all of the agencies have many prisons for men and maybe one. Very seldom they have more than one for women. So in the larger states, and most states really, they can have those facilities that do focus on sexual offender treatment programs and housing folks more safely than they would be were they be in general population. Interestingly, having staff tag you as a sex offender, true or not true, can be a way for staff to target you for abuse by other folks who are locked up. So absolutely. And again, this is such a nuanced thing. Like, yes, it's a risk for aggression, and yes, it's a risk for victimization. Discuss. House appropriately. Keep everyone safe. Excellent question. Thank you so much.
There was a question that came in for Johanna earlier on that I wanted to make sure we got a chance to ask you, Johanna. What's it like to advocate for incarcerated survivors as someone who has been in those shoes?
It's an honor. It really is. It's just an honor being a part of that and knowing what they're going through and being able to offer suggestions about what they're going through, the things that worked for me while I was incarcerated, things that I can picture, because if you haven't been incarcerated and you don't know what a room in segregation looks like, it gives me, I think I have a little bit more insight on how to be able to help people who are in segregation, because that's where I was held when I was sexually assaulted. And I'm able to give them suggestions on how to keep like important information in their heads and not forget about it. And how to do that without paper and pen and things like that, because oftentimes you have absolutely nothing in those situations. And I remember how I did it and it worked for me. So I love passing on information that helped me in a situation that is so seemingly helpless. So it's really awesome. It's an honor. It's very heartwarming. It's oftentimes also hard because I do remember being in that situation and what they're feeling and how real that is. So that's also a great question. And thank you very much for asking that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we are probably out of time for questions, but thank you everyone for, fascinating questions. And now let's pass it back to Linda for a few closing remarks.
Thanks so much, Cynthia, and thanks everyone. And if folks have other questions, please feel free to reach out to us. We can drop an email where folks can reach out with further questions in the chat. I really want to thank everyone for joining us today, especially particularly the staff who took your time to share about the work. Really, our staff, the hard work and dedication make all the difference to incarcerated survivors. And I hope you heard a little bit about that today. But it's also possible because of supporters like you all who are attending. Your generosity, your support powers this movement. And on behalf on our team and the survivors we work to protect their safety and dignity, I just want to say a huge thank you to everybody who donates time, energy, resource to JDI and our many allies. If you're interested in getting involved even more, there are several ways you can do so. First, we, of course, welcome donations of any amount. You can scan that QR code that's on the screen to help support this work, or click the link that's in the chat there. Second, our yearly Words of Hope campaign has just begun, and this is an opportunity to send holiday greetings to people who are incarcerated and often feel so alone and isolated during this time of year. So if you go to the link on the screen and also in the chat, you could request cards. We'll mail them to you. You fill them out with inspiring notes of encouragement and hope and just thinking of you. You send them back to us, and then we deliver them to prisons and jails and youth facilities around the country. And it's a great way to offer a direct lifeline and a recognition that you're not alone to people who are behind bars. So as Julie mentioned, we're thrilled that the Sexual Abuse Services and Detention Act, or SECEDA, was introduced in the House of Representatives last week. As Julie mentioned, this bill would fund community rape crisis centers to provide support to incarcerated survivors. It would also establish a national resource center to help advocates and corrections officials provide these services. And that just means that more people in prisons and jails who are often left alone to suffer would get the care and the help that they need and very much deserve. And that just means that more people in prisons and jails who are often left alone to suffer would get the care and the help that they need and very much deserve. And we do need help to get this passed. So we're going to drop a link in the chat right now so you can tell your representative to support SECEDA, and that really will make a big difference in the lives of incarcerated survivors. Next week, we'll be taking a look at how racism, and specifically anti-Blackness, has fueled the crisis of sexual abuse in detention and what we can do to build a more inclusive movement. We really hope to join you. That link is also in the chat. I want to thank everyone again for taking the time today to learn a little more about JDI and the movement to end sexual abuse and detention. We look forward to seeing you a week from today at our next event. Please join us. Thank you so much.